Thank you very much, everyone. خیلی خلاصه به فارسی بگم چون وقت ما بسیار محدوده و آقای رحمان پرواز دارن و برای 1 رو به 5 سالن رو باید ترک بکنن. ما خیلی سریع جلسه رو به انگلیسی اداره میکنیم و به احتمال زیاد میتونیم بعد به فارسی ادامه بدیم. الان به صحبت‌های آقای رحمان گوش میدیم. So I'd like to thank everyone for being here. I'm very grateful for Professor Javed Rahman to be joining us, United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran, who has the thankless task of chronicling of what's happening to Iran and also navigating the maze of the United Nations restrictions and systems. We're all ears, sir. We know that what we're about to hear is the report that has just been presented to the General Assembly. So we're very honored that before it's being read at the Human Rights Council, we're hearing it here. So thank you very much for that. And with all that,
Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, and participants. It's a great honor and great pleasure and a great privilege to be speaking to you here in Florence this afternoon. I would like to begin by thanking the organizing team of this conference, in particular, my good friend Roya and Mahmoud, for this generous invitation and for allowing me to speak to you today on the very important and critical subject under consideration. I speak to you in my capacity as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. I shall begin my presentation by providing you with an overview of the position of international law as regards the rights or right to life and the application of death penalty. I shall then consider the violations of the right to life that are taking place in the Islamic Republic of Iran, perpetuated through arbitrary and unlawful imposition of the death penalty. And before providing my conclusions and recommendations, I shall be making brief observations on the specific issue of the application of the death penalty for drug-related offenses in Iran. I begin with my premise and my reaffirmation of the statement made by the United Nations Human Rights Committee in its general comment number 36, where the committee notes, and I quote the committee here, the committee says, the death penalty cannot be reconciled with full respect for the right to life, and abolition of the death penalty is both desirable and necessary for the enhancement of human dignity and progressive development of human rights. End of quotation. I fully concur and agree with the UN Human Rights Committee. And to my mind, this is the position which all of the international community, including all states and other relevant stakeholders, must fully endorse and accept. As many of you would be aware, that ever since I took over the mandate as the UN Special Rapporteur on Iran in July 2018, one of my principal concerns has been the misuse of the death penalty in Iran. I have repeatedly and consistently expressed serious concerns at the laws and the application of the death penalty, resulting in arbitrary deprivation of life. You may know or you may not know that there are currently over 80 offenses in Iranian law which carry the application of death penalty. And several of these so-called offenses cannot be categorized as offenses, let alone the most serious offenses, as stated in Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And therefore, the death penalty designated as a punishment for these offenses violates international law and constitutes arbitrary deprivation of life. Furthermore, I'm extremely disturbed at the numerous violations of the right to a fair trial, including through heavy reliance of the judiciary on forced confessions extracted through torture and other forms of duress to prove guilt, denial of access to a lawyer, or denial of a lawyer of one's choosing, the low standard of evidence used by courts in death penalty cases, as well as the disproportionate nature of executions of the ethnic minorities. And of course, when we consider the situation as regards the application of death penalty in relation to drug-related offenses, that takes on board a broad dimension, which I will explain in a little while. The overarching and destructive role of Iran's revolutionary courts is particularly distressing. Despite a lack of a constitutional basis, Iran's revolutionary courts have continued to operate and sentence political activists, journalists, lawyers, and human rights defenders behind closed doors, with convictions in such cases influenced by intelligence bodies. Since their inception, these revolutionary courts have consistently violated fundamental human rights, including due process and the right to a fair trial. And these courts are responsible for issuing the vast majority of death penalty sentences, including thousands of summary and arbitrary executions. There is concrete and substantial evidence that torture is widely practiced in the Iranian criminal justice system against suspects after their arrest and during pre-trial phases to extract confessions, and there is a lack of a system of oversight that is capable of effectively investigating torture violations. Individuals convicted of national security offenses, political crimes, and those charged with drug-related offenses consistently complain of confessions obtained through torture. Solitary confinement is combined with torture as a technique to procure confessions, particularly in cases where there is otherwise insufficient evidence against the accused. Forced confessions are also frequently recorded and broadcasted on state television. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it was highly disturbing to receive reports of torture, ill treatment, and forced confessions of the protesters who were executed in the aftermath of the protests that began with the death in custody of the morality police of Jina Mahsa Amini on 16th of September 2022. As you would be aware, since the nationwide protest started on 16th of September last year, at least 7 persons have been executed by the Iranian authorities for their involvement in these protests. The overall picture, as I have noted in my most recent report, which some of you may be aware was published and available since last week, remains grim and extremely disturbing. My report expresses alarm at the increase in the number of executions over the past year, including through the implementation of the death penalty following unfair trials and systemic use of torture to extract forced confessions. At least 582 persons were executed in 2022, which represents a significant increase when we compare it to 2021, and at least 15 executions were for Afsad Filad and Muharrabe offenses. In addition, at least 16 women were executed last year. As of today, I understand that at least 534 persons have been executed, which includes at least 10 women. The numbers of those executed from the ethnic minority communities remains disproportionately high, particularly for drug-related or security-related crimes. In 2022, over 147 of those executed belonged to the Baloch minority. Individuals from the Baloch minority continue to be executed, And this year has marked a considerable increase in the numbers of their executions compared to last year. Now, let me turn to the specific issue of executions for drug-related offenses. As stated by the Human Rights Committee, reflecting international law, crimes not resulting directly and intentionally in death, including drug-related offenses, can never serve as a basis within the framework of Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which Iran is a state party, as you would know, for the imposition of the death penalty. Therefore, those states, and I include Iran in that execute individuals on drug-related offenses continue to violate international law. Now, you would know that Iran has had a tumultuous relationship, particularly when it comes to drug-related executions. While Iran remains one of the highest executioners in the world, there was a brief dip in the numbers of executions, partly because of the reduction in drug offender executions some years back. Following amendments to the anti-narcotics law, which came into force in November 2017, therefore, there was a marked reduction in drug-related executions between 2017 and 2020. According to some estimates, 25 drug-related executions took place during 2020. However, there has been a disturbing escalation, and there has been a disturbing feature once again in the alarming increase in these drug-related executions, with at least 126 of these executions taking place in 2021, including that of 5 women and at least 4 Afghan nationals for, as I said, drug-related charges. And you would know that none of the drug-related executions were announced by the authorities, which is very typical of the Iranian regime. Of the at least 582 people that I've mentioned who were executed last year, over 256 were executed for drug-related charges. In 2023, as of today, I understand that of the 534 persons who have been executed, at least 305 persons have been executed for drug-related offenses, which includes at least 10 women. So you can understand the gravity of the situation when a majority of the persons who are executed are based on drug-related offenses. I'm very concerned to note that individuals executed on the basis of drug-related charges are predominantly people who are living in poverty or who have been living in poverty and belong to minority communities, particularly from the Baloch minority community. In my discussions, and I've had several discussions with families of those who have been executed for drug-related offenses, various examples of gross violations of due process rights have been brought to my attention. I'm extremely disturbed and concerned that persons charged with drug-related offenses are frequently subjected to torture and kept in solitary confinement during the investigative stages following their arrest and are frequently denied access to a lawyer. Even in cases in which lawyers are present during trial proceedings, I consistently receive reports that they are often not afforded an opportunity to speak or defend their clients effectively or during the trial itself. All drug-related cases are tried, as you would know, by the revolutionary courts. And as I've already noted, these courts consistently violate the right to fair trial and due process rights, particularly the fact that trials are usually conducted behind closed doors and are short, and that defense lawyers are frequently not allowed to present any effective defense. These practices and procedures violate very clearly the provisions of Article 14 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, rendering all executions arbitrary and unlawful in international law. I acknowledge that the fight against drug trafficking and drug use remains a major challenge in many regions of the world, including for a country like Iran, which also needs to engage with complex issues owing to the geographical location of where it is, high levels of unemployment, and dire economic situation. Drug trafficking is part of the organized illicit economy in Iran and indeed in many countries of the world. That said, executions for drug-related offenses is not the solution. In fact, if anything, such violent and hostile responses are most likely to exacerbate, to enhance, to complicate this very difficult issue. I would like to stress upon a holistic approach to combating drug use and drug trafficking, including through drug treatments, through harm reduction programs, through rehabilitation, and inclusion into the society those individuals previously criminalized, ostracized, victimized, and targeted for taking drugs. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I urge all relevant stakeholders, as well as the Iranian authorities, that there must be an end to the imposition of death penalty for all drug-related offenses. And I call upon the international community and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes to carefully consider their engagement with the Islamic Republic of Iran on this issue. So to conclude, I will present some of my recommendations, and these are as follows. My consistent recommendations to the Iranian authorities are to immediately abolish, through legislation, the death penalty for all offenses. In particular, I ask the Iranian authorities to urgently amend legislation to prohibit the execution of persons who committed a crime while under the age of 18 years of age. And I also ask the Iranian authorities to urgently amend legislation to commute all death sentences for child offenders currently on death row. I ask that there must be an imposition of a moratorium, an immediate moratorium on all drug-related executions. I seek reform of the judicial system to ensure the independence of judiciary. And I ask for the dissolution and an end to the revolutionary courts and to establish all elements of the right to fair trial and due process. I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rahman. Before we move on to our next speaker, there's just a couple of points, if we have time, very quickly, that I'd like to point out. This year, in memory of the 7 young people who were executed in the last year as part of the Women, Life, Freedom movements, we, as the organizers of the conference, undertook to plant 7 trees in the name of the 7 executed. I want to tell you about one, Majid Reza Rahnavard. I will read all of them, but Majid Reza Rahnavard was 23 years old. It took 23 days to arrest him, prosecute him, and execute him. 23 days for this young man, 23 years old. So I think that proves the fact that we were talking about there are no fair trials. This morning in the presentations that we had, we heard about poverty playing a major role in the number of people who are being executed on drugs-related offenses. The UNODC's guidance on protection of human rights in countries where aid is provided for anti-drugs programs explicitly acknowledges the link between funding and executions. And it recommends the withdrawal of support where improvements were not made while there is clearly a need for international cooperation on counter-narcotics efforts. This must be proportionate to right to life and respect for human rights. In this context, what is your personal opinion on UNODC renewing this contract with the Islamic Republic this year on the 15th of March, in the middle of all this human life fever and all these?
Yes, thank you for this question. I think that the United Nations and the Office on Drugs and Crime, they need to reevaluate their policies, particularly in the light of the escalation, the alarming escalation that we are seeing in drug offender executions. As I mentioned, there was a reduction as of November 2017 until 2020. So I think that the UN Office on Drugs and Crimes must need to reevaluate, review what has happened in the last 3 years for such escalation that over 50% of executions are now drug-related. So therefore, there needs to be a consistent dialogue. And I have stated on numerous occasions that funding must be attached to human rights causes. If people are being executed in such an arbitrary manner, and this is evident from all of the reports from the United Nations Special Rapporteur, but also reports from the UN Secretary General, from the civil society, Amnesty, other agencies. So they must reevaluate, they must reconsider, and I would go insofar as to say that it isn't just the UN agencies, it is also the European Union, who has been funding Iranian authorities on improving the situation of drug offender who are within that ambit of drug offender offenses, and also individuals, EU states, who have been supporting Iranian authorities to actually consider, have a dialogue with the civil society, have a dialogue with independent experts, and they must not allow money to be invested, money to be allowed for further arbitrary, unlawful deprivation of life.
Thank you very much for that. Just one more question. Why do you think there's been such an increase in the last 3 years? What, in your opinion, contributes to that?
Yes. Okay, so as I mentioned, the law was changed in November 2017. There was a noticeable decline. So one would think, what is the reason? I think that the Iranian authorities have exploited the situation. They particularly target vulnerable communities. As I mentioned to you, I have been speaking to the relatives of many of these victims. These victims have no political voice. They can be easily dispensed. So a majority of them are from ethnic communities, the Balochis, and their pleas are irrelevant. I mean, we are already seeing what I have called in my report a possible crime against humanity in the killing of so many of these Balochis on the Black Friday that we saw. So these people, their lives, their voices do not matter to those who are in power. And that's why I see they want to placate the rest of the Iranian people to see, oh, we are actually quite strong. We are powerful. We are in control. We can execute people. But in fact, these are poor and vulnerable people who are just so helpless. And therefore, this is a responsibility on my shoulders. This is a responsibility on the shoulders of the international community, on the UN bodies, on EU, individual member states, to prevent this gross violation of human rights. Every life matters. And one person who is arbitrarily executed is upon our conscience. His life and his family's life is destroyed. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry that you will not hear Mahmoud's presentation. He's actually addressing that very point about the low cost of executing people like these vulnerable people. But I will make sure that you get a copy of it. Of
Copy.
course, I will make sure that you get a
And
copy
I
of
would,
everything.
it would be a great honor to hear to Mahmood. I hope that, there was some way, but if I can read a transcript of that, that would be.
Of course,
great.
we'll make sure that you have it. If I can ask Ms. Tara Azizi to join us on Zoom. Tara Azizi is a human rights lawyer who's joining us via Zoom from Washington. She's assessed the international standards of best practice that the UNODC says they observe when they come to renew such contracts that they have with Iran, with the violations in Iran. So is Tara there with us? Okay, Tara,
Yes.
we're waiting to hear from you. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Let's see here. So, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed panelists, honored guests, I want to start by thanking the ACI for arranging this well-needed conference today on the topic of right to life and the use of death penalty by the Iranian government. I'm also glad that the UN Special Rapporteur to Iran, Mr. Javid Rahman, is participating in the panel today, and thank you for the well-needed updated information. I hope that today's some kind of fruitful discussions will lead the path forward to increased access to justice and accountability for the Iranian people through increased international pressure. I wish I had the honor to be with you there in person, but since I'm based in Washington, D.C., unfortunately, I didn't have the honor to join you today in person. So I'm going to start to touch upon the sub-program covering the rule of law, crime, and criminal justice, and also I'm going to go into accountability. The program with the UNODC and Iran, I would say it's been several efforts by capacity building programs throughout the years with Iran about this subject. As many of you may know, there have been numerous individual evaluations of the outcome. And my ambition and time is not to do a comprehensive analysis of every outcome. Still, I'm going to focus on Iran's attitude towards the right to life, since that is urgent within this framework. When it comes to international best practices, one would encourage the review and improvement of domestic laws and regulations related to drug offenses. So this may include for a national state to ensure that legal processes are in accordance with international human rights standards and that penalties are proportionate to the crimes committed. As Mr. Javid also mentioned, the Iranian regime has a clear and well-documented history of denying the right to life by execution and a long history of human rights violations. I want to start by emphasizing that. They have been the leading executioner per capita for years. Criminal proceedings and the death penalty are still being weaponized by the Iranian government, as we've seen recently, to punish participants in protests and to strike fear into the population. And this is, of course, in violation of international human rights law. If we look at the domestic legislation in Iran and the judiciary, it still fails to meet minimum guarantees of fair trial and due processes required by international law. And despite the engagement between the UNODC and Iran and the several programs, this has still been an issue. So I want to emphasize that they still fail to meet minimum guarantees, such as, I'm going to mention it very briefly, application of vaguely worded criminal provisions, denial of access to lawyer and the right to present a defense, forced confessions obtained through torture and ill treatment, failure to respect the presumption of innocence, and denial of meaningful right to appeal against convictions. So the application of the death penalty goes beyond, as the Special Rapporteur also mentioned, the scope of the most serious crimes. So with that said, and while reviewing the evaluation of the UNODC and its program with Iran, and on the program, on the section of crime and criminal justice, I want to emphasize that there are no effective accountability mechanisms for victims to seek justice in Iran. And I'll also mention seeking international legal venues further when I continue with my presentation. So what happened in Iran? I'm not going to pay too much time to that because the Special Rapporteur mentioned it. The public execution in Iran, if we look at we have to look at the attention that Iran wants to divert from. And Iran has a very strategic way of diverting attention from human rights violations in Iran. We saw a decrease for drug-related crimes during 2017 to 2022. I think also this was very welcomed by everyone and emphasized by international institution and the UNODC that it's decreasing. But when looking at the statistics, we have to see it goes up during election in Iran, and then during the GCPOA, again, the execution rate goes up in Iran. So there's no will in this of changing the domestic legislation to appropriate to international law. And this is just another result of the structural flaws of the justice system that are so deep and so in contrary to the rule of law principles that one can barely today speak of a justice system in Iran. And as we've seen, since January 2023, at least 432 people were executions in Iran, and mostly for drug-related crimes. And this includes a disproportionate number of minorities. Why is Iran continue targeting drug-related crimes in relation to death penalty? Again, that is a low-cost victim to target. And it's easier for them to get away with those kind of death penalties. I do understand within this context, because I've been emphasizing the structural flaws of the justice system in Iran and how they are not appropriating international law, although several independent evaluation of the agreement between the UNODC and Iran. Drug control and crime prevention remain two important fields for which technical cooperation with Iran is in the interest of both the global community and Iran. That is something that the international community is focused on, and I understand that aspect. But when there is, it needs to be a parallel process of accountability with Iran, and I think we've been missing that. This is from a human rights law perspective, to find, so that it was so positive that the fact-finding mission finally was established, because that is a way of finding accountability and securing evidence. Although I would have seen the fact-finding mission on Iran to be expanded, to be wider, and also I hope an extension of the fact-finding mission. When it comes to Iran, we have to remember that Iran has incredible regional implications and global implications. What is the role of the international community and countries all over the world? I think we've seen recently that international pressure do help. Due to the killing of Jina Mahsa Amini, 150 cities in Iran, we saw demonstrations. In all provinces of Iran, we saw demonstrations. What did the international community do? What did the global media do? And here I want to emphasize the importance of the profession of journalism. Without them, I would never receive the information about what's happening in Iran. We would have never had information to secure evidence about what's going on in Iran. The minute the international community stops putting pressure on Iran and look at human rights violations in the country, we see that the situation deteriorates. So my biggest will is that the international community and its bodies still engage with what's happening in Iran and not losing focus on human rights violations in Iran, and give even more attention to drug-related crimes and death penalty. Because the minute, again, the attention is moving away from what's happening inside of Iran, that's when we see that the severe crackdown against its populations is increasing. And I just want to say, we're talking about public executions here. There's a lot of execution going in Iran that are not public. So just a parenthesis for the statistic. I want to mention a couple more things. I'm not going to take too much of your time. The UNODC, as the Special Rapporteur also mentioned, what I want to go in and emphasize, they should carefully consider the engagement with the Iranian government. And I do hope that they reevaluate, as you mentioned, but also that the international community can have parallel processes. Working and engaging with countries and have programs, that part is a part of the international community, I understand it. But at the same time, up until now, we didn't have any kind of accountability mechanism reviewing Iran. I'm, again, very glad that the fact-finding mission is established, but this has been going on in Iran since before the Jina Mahsa Amini movement. This is not something new, the severe crackdown on the right to life and death penalty in Iran. I really hope that European countries, the European Union, who are highly involved, I used to work in Europe with similar kind of projects, they're highly involved in funding a lot of projects, that they actually reevaluate and look over their soft language, I would say, in the evaluation, and how they actually perform with Iran. And also, I understand the lack of access to the country. Mr. Javid has been requesting several times to get access to the country, and has still not been allowed to get into the country. So working with program and capacity building with the country, where you have lack of access to the country and actually see the development of it, should also be questioned within this. And I think that's a way of pushing forward. And with that said, I know that my time is limited. I really hope that, in addition to what we've discussed today, that we continue to secure evidence, because that is the main tool that we have. We're not inside of Iran. There's no legal venues for the Iranian people to seek justice in Iran. But we have a common responsibility to make sure the day there is international legal venues or jurisdiction in universal jurisdiction in other countries outside of Iran, we have to make sure that we fulfill our answer and responsibility in securing evidence, and that we do not look back in a couple of years and said, we don't have enough evidence of what happened. We don't have enough evidence about the crackdowns, severe crackdowns on the right to life and death penalty in Iran. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tarajan. Before I move to the next speaker, Negin Shiraghai, I just want to ask a quick question. We heard about universal jurisdiction that Tara's mentioned, and you used the amazing term of crimes against humanity when you talk about what happened in Baluchistan on that bloody Friday. What is this universal jurisdiction, and how does that affect this international role and responsibility that we are addressing here? I mean, calling it a crime against humanity engages the international community in some form from a legal standpoint. How do you think that can be developed, please?
Thank you very much. Again, it's a very important question, because you see, if we have to have accountability in the current environment, it's not possible to have accountability within the jurisdiction of the Islamic Republic of Iran. They will not have transparent trials. There'll be the people who are in charge are committing these gross atrocities. So we then have to turn to alternative mechanisms of accountability. And one of the key mechanisms is resorting to universal jurisdiction. So some of you may remember that there was a trial and a conviction of a chap called Hamid Nouri in Sweden. I think his initial conviction was procured in 2021. And I immediately welcomed that conviction, because Hamid Nouri has serious involvement in the mass executions of 1988. He was convicted of murder and other serious crimes in international law. And it was right for the courts in Sweden to indict him and to convict him for a crime that was not committed in Sweden, but it is a crime recognized in international law. And it's a historic. For international crimes, you're right, there is no limitation period. So these people could be tried at any time. So once we identify individuals who have committed gross atrocities, serious crimes in international law, crimes against humanity, genocide, torture, then universal jurisdiction should be applied in other courts, in other jurisdictions, as we saw in Sweden. But there are many countries who can do that. And that is one avenue of accountability. So I wholeheartedly welcomed Hamid Nouri's conviction. And I think that the international community should follow an established principle of international criminal law to use universal jurisdiction to hold these individuals who have committed serious crimes in international law accountable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Negin Shiraghai, who's an investigative journalist, and she's been documenting corruption amongst IRGC or Sepah Pasdaran Enqilab Islami, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And with these international agreements, Sepah seems to be the party that is responsible for enforcing border control and drug smuggling offenses. So it's very important to then document how UNODC is going to engage with an organization that as we will hear, is in itself engaged in the drug smuggling, international drug smuggling. Thank you, Negin.
Thank you, Roya Jan, and thank you to the other speakers. I'm gonna apologize ahead for my voice. I was supposed to sing for you guys, but I'm not gonna do it because I have a cold. But anyways, I'm gonna be much more shorter than I was supposed to be. But if you have more questions about the details of it, you can always ask me after this event.
Can I just interrupt to say that we will have your presentation for publication in the book in full?
Yeah. Okay,
Thank
yeah,
you.
definitely. I'll give it to you. So the investigation Roya Jan was mentioning, it's called Kutena Podcast. So in 2020, I started independent podcast and dived into IRGC's inception. And then from there, I started going forward and understanding what's the pattern behind Iran's Revolutionary Guard and the corruption, a massive amount of corruption we are seeing in the country. And what I talk about today are the result of those investigations. So one of the first thing that comes to mind, I'm not going to go to the details of how IRGC was created, but from the inception, it was one of the most corrupted organizations that can exist. There are documents from the parts of IRGC, the commanders at the time of Iran-Iraq war, that are explaining how money laundering are happening inside that organization, even though that organization has always been trying to say that they are the keepers of the morality inside and outside the country. One of the biggest thing that happened during Iran-Iraq war is the creation of Quds Force, which is the a wing of IRGC, for some of you know it, but it's operating outside Iran. And a lot of things that you're hearing about IRGC being a terrorist group is in the hand of these groups. And what we are seeing mostly are happening because of Quds Force operations outside and inside Iran. One of the major things you need to understand about IRGC is from its inception to the day that we are living now, it started as a small group and then expanded really rapidly. And especially after Iran-Iraq war, it started to extend its hands in all different aspects of Iranian life, from businesses to judiciary to private sector and everything. And basically, one direct way of it is using its retired officers to be appointed either in the Iranian parliament Majlis or the judiciary system or the private sector. So right now, on the lowest estimate, they own 2/3 of the country in terms of every aspect of the society that you think about. That's why I use the phrase that they're like a squid, that they're expanding their hand in different parts of the society. And even in private sector, if you are active in Iran after a while and you become big enough for them to feel like there is a benefit of owning your private sector, they would try to do that. One of the interesting, this is really, yeah, it doesn't show it properly, but anyways, one of the things that we realized is that there was a rumor always when we were growing up in Iran that Khomeini gave the Iranians Revolutionary Guard a green light to do the drug trafficking. We've been successful in finding the sources who were in the room that got the permission. And the permission goes as, it was meant to fund the Iranians through the war. And the phrase that they used to convince Khomeini at the time, the person who created the Islamic Republic, was that we're going to use this to destabilize Kuffar's country. So it's the other countries that exist. We're going to use these drugs to make their people, addict, and then this will destabilize those countries. And Khomeini mentions that he gives the green light in the terms that you're not going to allow one drop of it come to the inside of the country. This is around the same time that Qasem Soleimani is active in Iraq and trying to, in Iran-Iraq war is doing his bidding from Kerman in that. Later on, when the war ends, Qasem Soleimani, who later becomes the head of Quds Force and famous for his operations and brutality, he goes to Kerman, his hometown, and starts a massive campaign against the drug trafficking. Some of people who lived in Iran at that time would remember these pictures of operations in Sistan, Baluchistan region and Kerman region, that they would arrest in their what they called ashrars, who were people who were doing drug trafficking. And there are a lot of executions happening at that time. And it's around the same time that another trend starts showing up inside the Iranian prisons. And that is that they start putting pressure on people who they arrested as a crime of execution, drug trafficking, and threaten them with execution. And by that, they start recruiting people for their own bidding. Around 20 years ago, I interviewed a young guy in my hometown, actually, that was arrested and was put on execution and death row, and then was beaten up inside the prison and was asked we will release you. If you come outside prison and start working for us and continue doing the job, we will allow you to continue your operation. This trend continues after that in every decade. We've seen, this is a famous picture of a time in early 2000s, that they started arresting what they called ashrar, arozel obash in different parts of Iran. And they use that technique to recruit more and more criminal groups into their own operations. One of the big examples of that, a big name that can showcase to you how this operation and strategy have worked during these years, is Naji Sharifi Zindashti. Naji Sharifi Zindashti was a drug trafficker and heroin trafficker in northwest of Iran. He was arrested in early 2000s, and he was put in jail on a death row. He fled the jail with the help of his friend, that we can say that it was either at the time by the Iranian government's or IRGC's bidding and leading how to do that, or at some point he starts to collaborate with the Iranian regime. From there, when you look at the pattern, it's really obvious that he cannot do the things that he does without the collaboration with IRGC. He flee from northwest of Iran to Turkey and start to creating his own criminal group and a big drug cartel in Turkey. He became really successful in that, and he became one of the biggest drug traffickers in Turkey. He's really famous in Turkey because of the arrest of his assets at one point. But until that point, he collaborated with IRGC in terrorizing and actually murdering and assassinating Iranian descendants in Turkey. He also is really successful in gathering and money laundering a lot of assets for the IRGC and laundering it back. There is this picture that you see here is a picture from recent, so after his arrest in Turkey and in international, as a part of international drug trafficking, he goes back to Iran and become really successful part of the society and IRGC. He starts collaboration with Shamkhani, who is one of the biggest commanders in Iran. And right now there are estimates that he owns 20% of heroin trafficking inside Iran. He's been praised in different official gatherings by the IRGC, and he's been a prominent figure since he went back to Iran, a prominent figure in northwest of Iran. I also wanted to go really deep into how that corrupt system network of IRGC works in drug trafficking. I don't have time, but there's a fascinating report by 13 agencies by UN that goes deep into that details of this international network of drug trafficking that is led by Iranian Quds Force, as well as using Hezbollah in Lebanon as its money laundering machine. This network of drug trafficking is really active in Latin America and South America. They've been using the Venezuelan government as a mean of operation. Venezuelan government actually issued original Venezuelan passport for IRGC and Quds Forces commanders, as well as the operators from Hezbollah to be able to travel around the world easily. And this has been raised in the US Congress as well. So in this, when you see this, you have to understand that in this part of it where Iran is, there is a part that comes from Afghanistan and the opium tradition, drug trafficking that comes to Iran. That trend has changed. So Iran at the moment, and because IRGC owns everything in Iran, they own the ports, they own all the shipments, they own storage places. So it's really easy for them to move these amount of drugs that are, tons of tons, to get it from Iran to other countries around the world, and especially get it to Europe. One of the major things that IRGC is also doing right now in Iran is using the underground labs to produce methamphetamine and other, lab drugs, and distributing those drugs both inside Iran and outside Iran as a means of social engineering. The examples of that has been raised by Jordanian government, as well as the Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region, and that Syria as well, after the war, became one of the hubs for production of these drugs that comes, and the origin of it is from Iran. We also seen the case of Azerbaijan and the Republic of Azerbaijan actually raising the case to UN and talking about the IRGC's operation and drug trafficking through Azerbaijan, and ask for the UN to stop it. So in the light of it, there's one thing I need you to understand, and that is when we are talking about IRGC and its network of drug, we are not talking about a hierarchical system. We are talking about heterarchy, which means they use the hubs of different groups. So there's like this group A that doesn't have a structural link to the IRGC. It's either a former commander or it's a former criminal that they recruited, and they allow them to do the bidding for them. The operation is in their hands. So it's difficult to directly link these operations to IRGC, and gives IRGC a kind of capability to deny any direct link with these drug groups. But as I mentioned before, it's been recruiting throughout years inside Iranian prison and have been using the death penalty as a means of oppression and intimidation of these people to work for them. There's estimate by the Politico estimates there's $100 to $140 billion money for IRGC in this illicit drug trafficking. I would argue that the number is much higher because they've been using this is a usual formula that the World Bank has put inside, that there is like 36% of a GDP in a developing country goes to illicit businesses. In Iran, IRGC owns much more than 36%. So the numbers are actually much higher. And this is me being really quick about these details, but if you want the documents or any more details of it, I would happily share it with you. And also, as Roya said,
It will be published in a book.
it will be published in a book.
I'm very grateful for you for keeping time. You did really well. I want to thank Professor Javed Rahman for being with us today. Unfortunately, we have to lose him. He has to catch his flight back to the United Kingdom. We're very grateful for your presence, for taking the time to travel this day, your entire day with us. And I will make sure that you receive all the presentations that we've had. So I'm sure it will assist you in any future investigations that you will do. We're very grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I also thank you for generously inviting me? I do apologize that I have academic commitments which cannot be rescheduled. So I have to leave you this afternoon. But I wish you the very best, and I wish you great success in the remainder of this conference. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll be in touch.